Welcome to Avenue Vineyard Community Church online teachings. Our prayer is that you would learn and grow through listening about the teachings on Jesus and the Holy Bible. Please come visit us in the Crystal Kids Youth Center in Edmonton, Alberta. Our address is 8718 118th Avenue Northwest. You can also download our free app from our webpage, www.avenuevineyard.com, to help keep you connected to our church family. Donations, tithes, and offerings can be made through our app and on our webpage. Thank you for listening, and God bless.
So this morning again is going to be one of our Engage Sundays. And these Sundays, they have been a little bit different than our regular Sundays. Part of the practice, we've been experimenting a little bit as part of this big process of navigating towards the new normal. We've been dealing with this COVID stuff for over 2 years now. I think it's over 2 years, or is it 2 years in March? Almost 2 years. It's been about 2 years anyway. Feels like a long, long, long time. And we keep hearing, or we've heard many times, that things are maybe going to change, and then it seems to change, and then it doesn't change. So now it's kind of like, supposedly it's changing, but do we really believe it's changing? And is it changing for how long? And on top of it, I'm going to try and be a little bit real with you guys too. This last week was a hard one for me. It was a heavy one, and I don't know I don't know all the reasons why it was. I think I started to feel it a little bit last Sunday after church. It was almost like an oppressive heaviness, like a real spiritual heaviness, and it really felt like it sucked a lot of life and energy out of me. And one of those weird places where, God help, Jesus help. And with this whole thing in the Ukraine right now, and I really do think we all need to be praying for the Ukraine and just pray for God's intervention there. I mean, as if 2 years of COVID wasn't crazy enough. Now, who knows what Putin's doing, and I'm not an expert on global politics, and I don't get the whole history of the USSR and what's going on with Ukraine, but I think it's sad. I felt really sad for the Ukrainian people, for Russia to just come in the way that they've done. And who knows what sort of effects that's going to have on the rest of the world. So, and it was weird to be thinking of some of what we see happening there. Like Russia is moving into, inhabit and kind of take over Ukraine, taking away the Ukraine's freedom. And in the previous few weeks on the news, we had all this freedom convoy stuff and people talking about freedom and wanting freedom from COVID. And now it's okay, well, the freedom that we in Canada that so many people were asking for a couple weeks ago, how does that compare with the freedom that people are longing for in Ukraine right now? And what does freedom look like in Ukraine compared to what freedom looks like for us here? And really, despite the fact that we're under still a measure of COVID restriction, really, can we say that we're not free compared to what the Ukrainians are dealing with right now? So it's a weird one. We've wrestled a bit with this idea of freedom and what it really means and what freedom could look like for us today, what it should look like for us today, how we should be viewing it, our heart perspectives. And, freedom, it did become a really important pandemic consideration, but it's continuing to be a consideration just with current events in the Ukraine. And I don't know, in the heaviness I was feeling, it was like, oh, Jesus, like we just need you, Jesus. We need you. And over the last number of weeks, we've reflected a little bit on the story, the Old Testament story where God rescues his people from slavery in Egypt. And on one hand, it's clear cut. Yay, God shows up, rescuer. Their slaves literally have been for 400 years. He rescues them and takes them out of slavery. So you'd think, yay, happy day. They go across the Red Sea and life should be a party now. Except it's not. They go through 40 years of this wilderness experience where they're whining and complaining, and some of them are losing their faith, and some of them are really fighting for their faith, and some of them are really pursuing God, and some of them are saying, forget God, let's go back to Egypt. They had a hard time with their new normal. They were in the wilderness. They were free. They'd been delivered from slavery, but the freedom that they got wasn't maybe the freedom that they wanted or what they were expecting. The freedom that they did get brought with it a lot of uncertainty. And like most human beings, uncertainty made them uncomfortable. It made them so uncomfortable that they wanted to go back to Egypt. Even if it was a form of slavery, at least they were familiar with it. At least in a weird sense, it was sort of comfortable. At least they could make sense of it. But God, it's kind of like, I don't know, and maybe it's kind of like the birthing process. You look forward to this little baby arriving, you wait with anticipation for 9 months, and then the arrival day comes, and it's not peaches and roses on day one. Labor is a painful process, can be a long, drawn-out process, and then transitioning to the family change. It's such a good thing. It's a life full of promise, but there is often this in-between, weird, awkward, sometimes difficult, sometimes painful season, this in-between. That's what the Israelites were in the wilderness. And I think some of what we've experienced over the last couple of years, some of what we're still experiencing can be similar. It's an in-between. It's the unpredictable. And one of the big lessons that they had to learn in the wilderness, part of the big reasons why God had them walk through it, was because they really needed to relearn how to trust God. They had to relearn what it meant to depend on God. They were so used to their daily slavery routine that they had kind of lost touch with what trust and dependence really looked like. So, maybe that's part of why we're in this in-between season too, or maybe it's part of the invitation anyways, is that with things being in between, with things being unpredictable, with the world being somewhat chaotic between COVID and attacking forces, maybe this is providing us this space where we can learn this similar lesson of what it really means to trust God, what it means to really depend on God and to come close to God. Giving up a sense of control and embracing the unpredictable, learning to trust and learning dependency, that was their path to freedom. And I think maybe in a similar way, it can be a path to better freedom for us too, losing our sense of control, being able to get to a place where we can embrace some unpredictableness. And maybe that can be our best path towards a fuller experience of freedom too. So I do think that in a really honest way, each of us maybe needs to have a heart-to-heart with God and consider how uncertainty, as much as we don't like how it feels, uncertainty and learning trust and dependence, it might really be an invitation for us in this moment, an invitation to help us come towards a better understanding of freedom. Maybe this is a season where God is pushing us deeper and deeper into dependency on Him. And I do think that in the sometimes confusion of this season, we all really just need to see Jesus better. The world needs more of Jesus, and I think we need to be more bold and more willing, I guess, to share Jesus with those that need Him, because He is our rock. And I was really reminded of that in my devotional reading this morning. And so as part of that for us, as a faith community over the last number of weeks, months, I guess, we have really tried to zero in, highlight our main church values as something that we can really latch on to and can really anchor us to Jesus. One of those are two big things here. We've been this idea of finding God in all things, which is really comes from the Jesuit tradition, recognizing that in the everyday humdrum, we can experience God's presence. We're invited to find His love and to experience His presence in the daily, whatever our daily looks like, in the daily ordinary. God is with us. He's with us all the time, but we're not always walking through our days with eyes open to see it. So we've been trying to have that intentional challenge. where can we see God at work in our daily ordinary? It's really encouraging when you start to recognize, oh my goodness, Jesus was with me then. Oh my goodness, this was a God moment. Oh, God just opened my eyes to this great experience, this great truth. And so even now, as we enter into our corporate time, can you guys think of an experience you had yourself this past week where you recognized God? And maybe you recognized him in the moment. Maybe you recognized him later in the day or a few days later. Maybe you're not going to recognize it till this morning, till right now. But just think, can you think of a time this past week where you recognized God? Where you recognized him at work in your life? Just think on it. Take a minute. If you can think of an encounter, hang on to that. Meditate on that experience, what it felt like. Sensing God's presence. You know, what was he trying to show you? What was he trying to communicate to you? God was at work in each of our lives this week, and he, you know, even now, he's in the midst of our community gathering. And I think he wants to lead us into those encounters with him. And one thing we haven't been doing, apart, you know, we've been on these Sunday mornings, we've been trying to say, hey, finding God in all things. Did you encounter God in some way like that this week? Yes, while we're here and when we have the coffee break today or at some point today, I would encourage you, if you have a God story like that and an encounter story, share it with one another. I think it would be great if we could even start putting them on the church, like the Facebook group page, or just to share stories. I did get an email this week from Jackson. Jackson was sharing with me, he had a pretty cool encounter at work this week at Hope Mission during one of the lunch hours. He was leading some singing, some music, and it wasn't even a Christian song that he was playing. I don't think it was some other song, but he had this awesome encounter with a guy from the mission, and it really seemed like a rich God experience. And I mean, as he shared his story with me in his email, he was excited. He'd found it encouraging. For me, it was encouraging for me to read it, to hear his story. I was like, yes, God, you're touching people's hearts. And especially in the challenging season that we've had, I think some encouraging God stories could be, you know, wonderful health supplements for the soul. Forget your creatine and take a boost of Jesus in your daily life. Add it to your vitamin D and vitamin C. We'll have some vitamin J. J for Jesus. So anyhow, you know, learning to find God in all things, I think, can also help us with these other values. We, as a community, we really want to press into growing as community and valuing worship. We want to grow as community. We want to be inspired to worship Jesus together. And together, then this idea of mission, what does it look like? The practice of the family business. Jesus said, you know, you guys should keep doing the things that I've been doing while I'm here. Well, what does that look like for us? Praying for people, ministering to people, you know, praying for healing, deliverance, justice, the whole spiel. You know, the early church, they experienced the presence of Jesus, and they didn't then just clap their hands and say, wow, that was a great meeting. Now I'm heading home to, you know, I don't know what the sport would have been then, chariot racing. I'm going to go home and watch chariot racing. You know, like it inspired every aspect of their daily lives. It you know, encounter with Jesus inspired this deep reverence and awe, and it led to a lifestyle of worship. You know, and part of a lifestyle of worship, yes, is gathering together and at certain times like this morning, and you know, taking times where we can intentionally open our hearts to God in a way that can really help us see his love for us in a deeper way. And again, we most consistently do that through songs on a Sunday morning, but worship can be a daily, throughout the week thing. It can be a daily mindset. Waking up with a spirit of gratitude with the gifts that God's given you is waking up in a spirit of worship. Giving thanks to God for the ways that he's provided for you throughout the week or the year. Like that is an attitude of worship. being grateful for family and friends, just all the gifts of life with God, recognizing God in all things. That is cultivating this lifestyle of worship. And so we want to try and do that too. Instead of worship just being singing songs on a Sunday morning, we want to try and cultivate this deeper awareness of worship, encountering God, his presence with us. And so we're going to do we're doing that again this morning. Instead of doing our traditional singing, we are going to do another little prayer exercise. Now, a couple weeks ago, we did this. We did a Lectio Divina prayer exercise, which we have done over the years. We do this exercise usually 2 or 3 times a year, probably. So you guys are probably a lot more familiar with Lectio Divina. It's Latin for divine reading, and it's just really a reflective way to let God speak to you through the scriptures. So today we're doing something similar, but it's not technically a Lectio Divina. This prayer exercise was inspired by good old Saint Ignatius, not Saint Nick, not Santa Claus, Saint Ignatius of Loyola. He led a really awesome Jesus movement in the 15th century. He lived most of his early years as a young little party boy. His life of indulgence and debauchery. Spent way too much time thinking of the latest fashion trends. He really liked wearing tight leggings, was Ignatius's thing, until he had his leg broken by a cannonball, and they had to do surgery to try and save his leg, but it left him slightly deformed, and then he was self-conscious. He couldn't wear his tight leggings because of his leg deformity. Anyhow, he had a rich encounter with God. God spoke to him in a number of dreams, and those encounters with God, those encounters with Jesus inspired Ignatius, and they inspired in him a lifestyle of worship where he spent a lot of time trying to find God in all things, where he tried to say, okay, God, where are you at work in my life today? Where can I join you in what you're trying to do today? And he developed a lot of practices to help train our spiritual senses, spiritual disciplines, to help us become more aware of what God was doing in our lives. He encouraged believers to engage a Bible story, take a Bible story, and basically, as you read it, reflect on it, try and imagine that you're there in the story. Try to imagine that it's happening in the moment that you're in right now, and try and be aware of what he called the movements of the soul. Like when again, remember the first time you had a potential love interest, your first crush. Whenever you were in the presence of that person, there'd be a sense of excitement. There'd be, your heart would beat a little faster. You'd maybe get a little bit nervous, but there would be a movement of your soul as you were in the presence of this person that was special to you. And Ignatius says, hey, look, when we come close to the creator of the universe, when we're in the presence of Jesus, and Jesus is just so full of grace and compassion and love, his presence will inspire in us movements of the soul. We will feel something. We will feel his grace. We will feel an infusion of peace. We will feel hope. We will feel his love being poured into us. Movements of the soul. And so this idea of engaging the scriptures in this way was really an idea of learning to see where God was active in the present. Again, it's part of finding God in all things. So it's a reflective reading that is a type of personal examination of your current space. It's really just learning to be self-aware. Where are you at mentally? Let Jesus engage where you're at. It could be good, could be bad. I had a heavy week. I was not so hot this past week, emotionally. Yes, mental state, emotional state, spiritual state. Where are you doing well? Where are you seeing Jesus and moving in a healthy direction? Where do you maybe need a little bit of a course correction? And it's engaging the Bible stories in a way that really engages your full imagination, allowing the Holy Spirit to take your imagination and use your imagination to help you have a richer experience. Letting all of your senses create a picture of the scene so that you can really picture yourself with Jesus. So in reading like this, you really do want to engage your senses and think, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? And literally, somebody, you might catch a waft of somebody's coffee here this morning. Well, what is that smell communicating to you? What What might be a takeaway from that? Are you too hot in the room? Is the heat on too much, or are you cold? And what might God be saying to you through those senses? It's really about becoming a participant in the story, and even to the point where you can imagine, like, if you were in the story, imagine that you were. Who are you? Are you one of the disciples? Are you a person that's being healed? Are you just a member of the crowd watching Jesus interact with other people? And then what does the story look like? So pay attention to the connections. If there is a storm in the story, maybe is there a storm in your real life? Is there a blind person in the story? Well, ask, blindness. Lord, what does this say to me about blindness? Am I acting in a blind way this morning? Is there something I'm not seeing? So really just reflect on how Jesus interacts with you in light of all those connections. How does Jesus want to be present to those things in your life right now? So the point here is really encounter with Jesus through the biblical story. And so for this exercise to be most effective, we really need to engage it. If we just sit quietly waiting for something, we might miss out. But if we try and actively engage, Lord, what do you want to say to me this morning? Lord, where are you moving in my life right now? Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, Lord, what are you doing? Then I think we're posturing ourselves in a good way to try and encounter God this morning. So we're going to jump into a story. I'm going to pray. And I've recruited a helper this morning that's actually going to read the Bible story for us. We're going to do a story together today out of Mark 10. And the story in Mark 10, it's Jesus actually dealing with, historically we call it the rich young man or the rich young ruler, coming to ask Jesus, hey, Lord, what should I do right now? And Jesus giving his advice. So you're maybe familiar with the story. But I do think that this story could be significant as in this season, partly because of the way we've wrestled with freedom. Like, what represents freedom to us? What sort of things do we latch onto in our desire to experience freedom or have freedom? Are there certain things in our lives that we are maybe idolizing? And oftentimes, we don't realize that we're idolizing certain things, but are we latching onto certain things that are maybe getting in the way of us being able to experience God in a better way? And I think engaging with this story in Mark 10 this morning can maybe help us in that regard. So I'm going to pray to just start the exercise, and then my assistant is going to read through the story one time just as a way to familiarize yourself with it. We'll pause. You can have a short bit to reflect on the story. Then I'm going to suggest some guiding questions just to help you engage, and then we'll read through the story a couple more times. So I'll kind of lead you through it. But Jesus, as we start this morning, Lord, I really do ask that you would just help our hearts to be open this morning. Lord, again, this is a not as common expression of worship for us. It's a bit of a different thing. It's a bit of an experiment. I pray, Lord, that we would make the most of this time. I pray that in a really good way, Lord, that we could turn our hearts to you in a way where we are open to engage the story, to hear your voice, to allow you to speak to us, Lord, in a personal way. And Lord, just really help us to be receptive to what you would like to reveal. So, Lord, in the quiet, in the reflection, I do ask that you would speak to our hearts.
As Jesus started on his way, a man came running up to him. Kneeling down in front of him, he cried out, "Good teacher, what one thing am I required to do to gain eternal life?" Jesus responded, "Why do you call me good? Only God is truly good. You already know the commandments. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give a false testimony, do not cheat, and honor your father and mother." The man said to Jesus, "Teacher, I have carefully obeyed these laws since my youth." Jesus fixed his gaze upon the man with tender love and said to him, "Yet there is still one thing in you lacking. Go, sell all that you have and give the money to the poor. Then all of your treasure will be in heaven. After you've done this, come back and walk with me." Completely shocked by Jesus' answer, he turned and walked away very sad, for he was extremely rich. Jesus looked at the faces of his disciples and said, "How hard it is for the wealthy to enter into God's kingdom realm." The disciples were startled when they heard this, but Jesus again said to them, "Children, it is next to impossible for those who trust in their riches to find their way into God's kingdom realm. It is easier to stuff a rope through the eye of a needle than for a wealthy person to enter into God's kingdom realm." But this left them all the more astonished, and they whispered to one another, "Then who could ever be saved?" Jesus looked at them and replied, "With people, it is impossible, but not with God. God makes all things possible."
Okay, that's the story. Now, trying to stay in a posture of prayer, trying to keep your heart focused as if you were just engaging Jesus in prayer now, which engage Jesus in prayer. This is a prayerful exercise. And it might help to close your eyes here, but imagine the setting of the story. Imagine, these crowd of people coming, wanting to talk to Jesus, the disciples gathered around, this young guy coming to ask Jesus this question. Imagine the setting of the story and try and place yourself in it. Use all of your senses to create a picture and just imagine being there at the scene near Jesus. Notice little details that you might see that engage your senses. What do you see? Maybe there's a shepherd nearby with some sheep. What are you hearing? Maybe Jesus is teaching on the edge of a marketplace. What are you smelling? If he's near a fishing village, maybe you're smelling some fish. But just try and place yourself in the scene wherever you feel most drawn, and let the Holy Spirit lead you to where you feel most drawn. Trust where you feel drawn. And is there something in the story and in what you're feeling that reflects your personal space? Just become a participant in the story. Which character are you? Consider the rich man's spiritual freedom. Is he really free or is he lacking freedom? How so? Notice how Jesus relates to him. Notice how Jesus receives him and how he talks to him. A question to maybe ask would be, what is attracting me to following Jesus? And what are some things that are maybe holding me back? We're going to read the story again.
As Jesus started on his way, a man came running up to him. Kneeling down in front of him, he cried out, "Good teacher, what one thing am I required to do to gain eternal life?" Jesus responded, "Why do you call me good? Only God is truly good. You already know the commandments. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give a false testimony, do not cheat, and honor your father and mother." The man said to Jesus, "Teacher, I have carefully obeyed these laws since my youth." Jesus fixed his gaze upon the man with tender love and said to him, "Yet there is still one thing in you lacking. Go, sell all that you have and give the money to the poor. Then all of your treasure will be in heaven. After you've done this, come back and walk with me." Completely shocked by Jesus' answer, he turned and walked away very sad, for he was extremely rich. Jesus looked at the faces of his disciples and said, "How hard it is for the wealthy to enter into God's kingdom realm." The disciples were startled when they heard this, but Jesus again said to them, "Children, it is next to impossible for those who trust in their riches to find their way into God's kingdom realm. It is easier to stuff a rope through the eye of a needle than for a wealthy person to enter into God's kingdom realm." But this left them all the more astonished, and they whispered to one another, "Then who could ever be saved?" Jesus looked at them and replied, "With people it is impossible, but not with God. God makes all things possible."
Reflect on the story. Where is the Holy Spirit leading you? As we recognize something that God might be speaking to us or something that he might be highlighting to us, a touch point for us, it's at that point that we can start to consider or be open to an invitation there to respond. You know, if God is showing me this thing, if he's highlighting this thing, if his presence he's revealing it to me in a certain way, what is the invitation there for a response? Maybe you're just feeling God come to you in a posture of love, and the response is simply just to sit and enjoy it. But maybe the response, maybe God's shown you something that is out of order in your life, and you're realizing, okay, Lord, I'm taking this as an invitation this morning to try and focus on changing this today. So at this stage, we do kind of want to try and respond to Jesus in prayer. Speak to him from your heart and just ask him what his invitation to you might be. In the story, what is he doing? What is he saying? What is his demeanor? We'll read the story one last time.
As Jesus started on his way, a man came running up to him. Kneeling down in front of him, he cried out, "Good teacher, what one thing am I required to do to gain eternal life?" Jesus responded, "Why do you call me good? Only God is truly good. You already know the commandments. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give a false testimony, do not cheat, and honor your father and mother." The man said to Jesus, "Teacher, I have carefully obeyed these laws since my youth." Jesus fixed his gaze upon the man with tender love and said to him, "Yet there is still one thing in you lacking. Go, sell all that you have and give the money to the poor. Then all of your treasure will be in heaven. After you've done this, come back and walk with me." Completely shocked by Jesus' answer, he turned and walked away very sad, for he was extremely rich. Jesus looked at the faces of his disciples and said, "How hard it is for the wealthy to enter into God's kingdom realm." The disciples were startled when they heard this, but Jesus again said to them, "Children, it is next to impossible for those who trust in their riches to find their way into God's kingdom realm. It is easier to stuff a rope through the eye of a needle than for a wealthy person to enter into God's kingdom realm." But this left them all the more astonished, and they whispered to one another, "Then who could ever be saved?" Jesus looked at them and replied, "With people it is impossible, but not with God. God makes all things possible."
We're going to start wrapping up the exercise now, but I'm just going to give you some space where, take a minute or two and have a prayer conversation with Jesus where you can express your response to him. Highlight your takeaways from the story or what the experience was like, what thoughts jumped into your mind, how you saw Jesus respond to the man, how you felt like Jesus responded to you. If you feel, Jesus taking you along a certain pathway in your thinking, ask him, Lord, where are you trying to take me with this? Reflect on what action this experience might free you or encourage you to take. As we finish things up, some of you might be the journaling type. It might be helpful to record your experience in your journal, to write it down somewhere and spend some time later praying through it some more. Because we're doing this exercise this morning in a bit of a group setting, another way that we could continue to engage this morning would be, we're about to move to the coffee break, but maybe take some time this morning, if you're visiting with someone, to share with them. Like, if you felt like God spoke to you in a specific way during the exercise, just share that with someone. Tell them what your experience was. Tell them what lessons you felt Jesus highlighted for you, or just the ideas that came to mind. And share these things with one another. Discuss them as a way of helping those ideas and thoughts percolate a little bit more. Before we break for coffee, did anyone have a significant reflection time this morning, something that you would like to share with the rest of us? I think one takeaway for me, and I want to spend some more time thinking on this, but it's, Jesus dealt with the young guy in a very tender way. I loved how in the one part of the passage it says that with tender love, Jesus responded to him. But if you notice, like the very beginning of the story, the guy, he's kind of excited when he comes to Jesus. He's motivated. He wants this Jesus life. But then when Jesus explains to him kind of what the cost is going to be, the guy leaves kind of defeated, because it's like, oi, I wasn't prepared to give that much. But I think it's partly because, again, the guy is really relying on or counting on, again, a sense of control, his worldly expectations, things that he can control, his own resources, his own gifts, his own abilities, his own strengths. He's feeling pretty secure. He's feeling really secure when he comes up to Jesus. And Jesus, in effect, says, all those things that you're placing your security in, they're not very secure. Following me, your hope is in heaven, the things of heaven, your hope is in me. These gifts are good. Celebrate the gifts. Just don't count on them for life and joy and happiness too much, because they're here today and gone tomorrow. And I think, one thing that we have experienced many, many times during this COVID season is we have had expectations of how things were going. Oh, things are getting better now. We are lifting restrictions. Yay, expectation. Finding hope in that, finding joy in that, finding excitement in that. Oh, guess what? We're not getting that anymore. It's being taken away. Crushing discouragement. When you have expectations and then those expectations aren't met, it's often difficult. So what's the answer? Should we not have any expectations? In some ways, I think kinda. That's contentment, gratitude, appreciating gifts, yes, but not putting all of our eggs in one basket. Enjoying the daily gifts and letting God be God and looking for opportunity for that to be enough. I don't know, bit of a ramble. But if you want to, you can come and chat with me more about that over coffee, or you can share with one another. So, from this, again, encounter with Jesus, often brings some inspiration. There is an overflow out of his love that brings life, spills life into us. And that's partly what we want to try and figure out how to engage next, this lifestyle of mission, putting actions to what we believe, taking a stand for mercy and justice, learning what it looks like to love the broken and the hurting in an effective way, reaching and praying for healing in all the areas of life around us that we see that needs it. That's the mission part of things. And so after the break, after having some intentional time to encounter Jesus, after the break, we're going to watch another teaching video by Carl. This morning it's by Carl, where he's going to help us reflect on some healthy ways that we can share Jesus with other people and help them also encounter the life that he is more than happy to help us discover.